It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
Are you getting enough money for schools in the budget, Minister?
Westminster's gearing up for tomorrow's budget.
We can't turn around 14 years of failure in a single budget. What we can do is both arrest the decline and start turning the system around.
Will Rachel Reeves be the first Chancellor in 13 years to raise fuel duty?
Wages and fuel are our biggest outgoings, so obviously if fuel goes up, it's going to impact us quite a bit.
We'll also be speaking to former Home Secretary Lord Blunkett about the prisons crisis. And with the birth rate dropping to the lowest level since records began, how worried should we be? Joining us today, as you heard, Labour peer David Blunkett, Shadow Minister for Energy Andrew Bowie, Fatima Ibrahim, the Co-Executive Director of Green New Deal, and former Conservative Special Advisor Kirsty Buchanan. This is Politics Live. Let's start with the story you heard at the end of the headlines there. The Financial Times, birth rate drops to record low in England and Wales. According to the Office for National Statistics, 2023 had the lowest number since records began in 1938. Starting with you, David Blunkett, should we be worried, as I garble my words?
No, I don't think we should. I'm not going to do what the Italian Prime Minister did and call upon women to have more babies. I think what we need to do is to allow people choice. That does mean investing in childcare, of course, because if people can't actually make ends meet and they can't actually do the family budget, then most people, not all, but most people will be sensible and work out what's feasible for them. I think it does have implications, however, for people needing to work longer. And it has implications in terms of managed and properly secure migration. But I don't think we should panic.
Should we be worried, if not panicked? Andrew?
No, I don't think we should be. I agree with David. This does have implications in terms of funding childcare. But when you read the report, there are a lot of positives in there. It talks about the choice that women have now compared to the choices that they had back in the 50s and 60s, for example. More women getting into work and for longer, which is, of course, a very positive thing for us as a country. But we do also need to look at the trade-offs, you know, with an ageing population. How do we pay for social care, etc.? How do we ensure that those women who want to work and have children don't face that choice and are able to do both? And therefore, as David says, we need to have childcare in a place which can support them to do that. Very pleased that when we were in government, we introduced far more free childcare funded places than was the case before. We need to continue in that work moving forward. But I don't think we need to be worried, but we do need to be aware of the trade-offs that come as a result of a lower birth rate.
Fatima, do you agree with the politicians that it's nothing really to be worried about, the fact that our birth rate has dropped to a record low?
So I am of an age where I would be considering to have a child and represent an organisation of young people that fit this sort of bracket of a generation that is choosing not to have children at the same rate as previous generations. We need to understand why people are making this choice. Yes, some people might not want to have children, but also there's a huge cost of living crisis. We are the first generation who's going to be worse off than our parents, where we have insecure work, where we're unlikely to own anything, let alone a home. And so faced with that and the existential crisis of the climate crisis, yeah, there's a lot of people in my generation and a lot of my friends who are considering not having children because they're worried about the future they'll inherit.
Kirsty?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that most Western countries are grappling with, I think. And you can understand a lot of this, obviously, is about the cost of childcare. The other, as Fatima's just mentioned, the other big factor in this is housing and housing costs and the inability for people to get onto the housing ladder. But there are a number of really kind of difficult conversations that politicians will need to have over the next 5-10 years on this subject around managing migration and around whether you need to raise the age of retirement further, which means we would need to be healthier to be able to work longer. True. And given the state of the NHS, the chances of that is a pretty high order. And, of course, this great big ballooning welfare bill that we have over pensions, and that's something, the triple lock is something that no politician wants to touch.
Right. And I agree entirely with that. I mean, somebody who just had 3 stents fitted in my arteries to keep me going, I think exactly what we need. We need to say to people, we need to get you fit, keep you fit. We need to repair you when you're down, and then keep going. I'm keeping going.
I don't understand every time we talk about something that might touch on young people, why we end up talking about older people. This is a conversation about why young people are not having children. And this report is partly the direct result of successive governments who have failed young people and who have failed young families.
Well, Andrew,
there's some truth in that, but let me tell you why I mentioned it. Because otherwise, young people have a bigger burden to carry in terms of an ageing population. So some of us have got a responsibility to keep going. If you're not, your generation, and not to carry an even bigger burden.
But has politics been tilted towards older voters over the past few
they
decades?
vote.
Right. Well, yeah.
I mean,
so,
and David's right,
that
I mean,
means
older people
policy.
do vote.
Well, that means policies
but
have been tilted, and in other words, there's less choice for younger people to make the decisions that Fatima has said.
Look, a country is judged on how they treat and care for the most vulnerable, and some of those vulnerable people in our society are the elderly. So it's very important that we do speak about the issues that face our pensioners and those of pensionable age. But we also need to speak about the issues that are facing young people today. Yes, this is one of the issues right now, the cost of living, the inability to get on the housing ladder, everything else that was raised just a second ago. And I'm very clear that as a party, we haven't been dealing with those issues, or indeed speaking about those issues for far too long. That's our challenge, and certainly a challenge that whoever wins the leadership race this weekend will have to take on and grapple, as well as still ensuring that those pensioners in this country, to whom we owe so much, get the support that they deserve.
I mean, I think that's a broad and sweeping statement. There are pensioners in this country who are vulnerable and that we need to support. We also have huge wealth concentration in this country that is stacked towards people who are older. There's an intergenerational theft afoot where we are under-prioritizing young people. We have a deeply unequal country. We have huge concentrations of wealth, and we have successive governments who are refusing to bring forward wealth taxes that would invest in public services, that would invest in young people.
Well, let's
and young
pick up your
families.
intergenerational theft, David and Andrew. Is that what's been happening?
Well, David Willett's former Conservative cabinet minister has written extensively about this, and there is some truth in the complete imbalance, which is why the Child Trust Fund, which I was very proud to take part in creating over 20 years ago, was a good idea. It was abolished by the coalition government, which would have given young people a stake, not big enough, because we didn't do it ambitiously and stuff, but it was a recognition. And we've got to do a lot more to help young people to make the kind of choices that I had when I was their age.
Because if you don't have a stake in society or the system, then it is
absolutely, and there's a reason that the Conservative Party this year plunged to our lowest ever levels of support with under 25s, under 35s, under 45s, indeed under 50s. And it's because we have not been developing the policies or speaking to a younger generation. As I said, that's something we're going to have to grapple with if we're ever going to win back the trust of the British people, because grandparents care more about their grandchildren than anything else in this world. So
which is why they want to be taxed.
Well, I don't know.
Let me just get a final word from Kirsty before we move on.
Let's not get on to fuel allowance.
Well, no, we can if you want.
Well, we're going to get onto the budget in just a minute.
Without a doubt, the biggest failings for the younger generation has been the failure to build homes. That successive governments have created this huge imbalance where it's now 8, 9, 10 times your average salary to be able to get onto the housing ladder. And so for young people, not only does democracy increasingly not work for them, capitalism doesn't work for them. If you can't get a stake in society and in capital, then why on earth should you invest in that society?
Well, we've been talking about some of the policies that may or may not be part of tomorrow's budget. Rachel Reeves's first budget, a huge length of time since Labour won the election in July and announcing those measures. We can see members of the Cabinet arriving. There's Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, walking into Number 10 to meet the Prime Minister as they discuss the politics around the budget. Yvette Cooper there, the Home Secretary, particularly the idea of tax rises that we know are coming. It'll all be worth it, is the broad line that will be coming out of the government and out of Rachel Reeves's announcements at the dispatch box tomorrow. It was also, ironically, I suppose, the final shadow cabinet meeting, Andrew Bowie, for Rishi Sunak as leader, and you were there.
Yeah, I came straight.
What was it like?
It was quite emotional, but also very pragmatic. Looking forward to the budget tomorrow. Of course, Rishi will be responding for the opposition, reflecting on Rishi's record and when he has been leader, which, you know, he did steady the ship. He did take us into that election. Obviously, the result did not go the way that we wanted, but I think that a lot of the reasons for that were built in long before Rishi became leader. So we reflected, thanked him for his service, and then look forward to a response to the budget tomorrow.
David Blunkett, have you been speaking to Rachel Reeves over the past few months, the build-up into this budget?
I did have a conversation with Rachel way back in the summer, but I'm afraid she's not been consulting me on the budget. What we do know, and what the Cabinet know, is a lot more about the budget than we ever knew the day before, because so much of it has been briefed. Some of the briefing is clearly wrong, and in some cases, thank goodness. And we might get some surprises tomorrow. Who knows?
Right. I mean,
Speaker's not very happy.
No, I was going to say it's been brief, but is that an indication, David, of how difficult this is going to be? That we've had so much from the horse's mouth, if you like, Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister.
I think they've been trying to prepare people for that. So, some of it well, some of it ineptly, and things are. I think a lot of people are learning rather fast. And for the sake of the nation, they need to learn much more quickly.
Well, let's continue with some of the speculation that we think might or might not be in the budget. The Daily Express headline, Brits brace for Labour's fuel duty rise as much as 7p per litre. Yes, speculation the government could increase fuel duty by between 5 and 8p per litre. And at the moment, it's worth about £25 billion a year to the Exchequer, but it hasn't increased since 2011. And in 2022, post-pandemic, the last government, Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, I think at the time, reduced it by 5 pence. Now, one business owner who would be affected by any increase in fuel duty is Nikki Meader, who owns a florist business in Kent. Welcome to you, Nikki. How much do you rely on your business, for your business, I said, on your van?
Oh, absolutely. You know, everybody wants everything delivered right away these days. I would say that basically 85% of my retail shop is now deliveries and only 15% is walk-in footfall. So we rely on it, and it makes a big difference as to whether we can trade or not.
I mean, what impact would a rise in fuel duty have? Let's say a 5p.
I know 5p doesn't sound a lot, but when you build that up on a very small family business, as we are, the cash flow that it will cause me issues with. And then obviously there's the consumer's demand. Yes, they want it delivered, but will they take on those price rises that we will need to give in order to cover those costs? Who knows? Right, so you would have to put up the prices. We can see your beautiful flowers behind you there. Yes, absolutely. We can't keep withstanding all of these rises. We're already having trouble getting products into the country, and it's costing us more to get product into the country. The logistics in this country cost us more to move around in country than it costs us to get things from Europe brought into the country.
Yes, I was going to ask you about some of the other measures that we think are going to be announced tomorrow, such as the increase in the minimum wage and employers' national insurance contributions going up.
Absolutely. So as a small retail business, that's 2 more additions that I've then got to balance in my books. And as we all know, that being on the high street isn't easy these days in itself. So now I have all of these things to manage. And to be honest, I'm worried what that's going to do stress-wise, how much more that I'm going to have to take on just to balance the books and keep these people employed.
Nikki, stay with us for the discussion. Fatima, do you think fuel duty should be raised?
I think it needs to be raised. This is something that's difficult, and I understand it will impact people differently, but this is something successive governments have sort of passed on and passed the buck on. For a decade, we have not seen a rise. I think a budget is supposed to be holistic. It's supposed to, deliver broad sweeping policies that are able to, raise the tax income that we need and support those who need it. For me, there's another decision and choice that this government has made, which is to increase the bus cap by 50%, which actually I think is damaging, because if we need to raise fuel tax duty, we need to allow people to use public transport that's affordable. And seeing this double rise, I think, will impact people and is actually not the type of climate-friendly, community-friendly policies that we want to see.
Do you think fuel duty should go up after a decade?
No, absolutely not. And as somebody who represents a very rural constituency in which so many are reliant on their car for their day-to-day needs in terms of getting to work, seeing family, friends, or just getting about, I think this would be a retrograde step and certainly something that the Chancellor should think very carefully about before introducing, if indeed she is thinking about it, because we don't know yet whether or not she is heading down this path. But I would advise her not to consider this as one of the options moving forward. It would be yet another increase in tax on working people. And there's a reason that business confidence in this country is at a 4-month low, because, as David said, they have been managing expectations, sometimes badly, sometimes well, sometimes incredibly badly, and so much so that people are genuinely worried, especially small business owners, like we've just heard from there, about what actually might be coming from the Chancellor tomorrow lunchtime.
David, do you have sympathy with business owners like Nikki Meader?
I have sympathy with Nikki. I have sympathy with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, because she, not just on this, but on a whole range of issues, inherits problems that have not been addressed. I mean, if you've held it down, or in one case cut it, knowing that actually you didn't have the resource to fill the gap, then what do you do? And if, as Farham has said, you put bus fares up, there's almost certainly an equality case. I'm not sure that Rachel Reeves will put it up by the kind of amounts that people are talking about. I think that there might be a surprise there, but it would also be incredibly surprising if she didn't actually touch it at all. Last time, of course, there was a cut. The RAC and others pointed out that the motorists didn't benefit because the suppliers just put up the prices. Yeah.
What do you think, Kirsty? Is it time?
No, I don't think it's time. Fuel duty is a regressive tax. It disproportionately hits people on the lowest incomes the hardest, so I think it would be a retrograde move. I do have a solution, though, for the Chancellor.
Oh.
It starts small, but we all know she's in a unique window at the moment where she can start to introduce taxation on electric vehicles. So just to we have 41 million conventional vehicles on the road at the moment. From next year, all Jaguars sold in this country will be electric. They pay no tax on their price per mile at all, none.
We're going to have to, aren't we?
And
because by 2030, we'll lose about 3 billion.
Well, this is the point, is how do you replace the revenue that's lost?
Yeah, and so not only is it a regressive tax, it's a declining tax over the next 10 years. That tax take will get smaller. And so there's a world right now where you can grandfather transition from one to the other, so that anybody that buys a new electric vehicle now has that in. And we've done some polling at the company I work for, Stonehaven, and there's huge support right across ages, right across the political spectrum, to introduce a tax now in line with conventional.
Well, and Rachel Reeves, she may be listening to you afterwards, but she's taking Treasury questions at the moment. You can see there on your screens in the House of Commons. Yes, what do you say to that? Because there are also lots of people who rely on their cars, who don't live in the cities where there are decent public transport systems, and without their cars, they'd be stranded.
I mean, I would agree with you. I think that tax model would be more fair and ensure that actually there isn't a massive black hole in the Treasury's books as more people move into electric vehicles, as more cars get more efficient, and would allow the government to then invest in public services and provide specific support for those in rural communities that won't be able to get off using their cars, while bringing down private motor use in cities and towns where we really need to tackle the air pollution crisis and need to get people using public transport.
One solution, of course, to the revenue that will be lost, the Daily Telegraph headline, introduce pay per mile road tax and scrap fuel duty, says think tank. In fact, I think a couple of think tanks have suggested that. Would you agree with that?
That is exactly what this is about. You're paying price per mile. Crucially as well, you can also do that in a local sense. So local authorities who are really strapped for cash will be able to take some of that revenue.
But you'd have to phase it in, of course.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Nikki, what do you think of that idea of pay per mile road tax?
I think that consumers would have a better understanding of just how much it costs us to run a delivery vehicle to meet their needs. So could be a better idea.
Right, Andrew?
Now, I'm hugely sceptical about paper mile, given the constituency that I represent. You know, it's over 50 miles from one end of it to the other. People travel large distances in my constituency on a daily basis, and introducing a paper mile system would unfairly hit those people that live in more rural parts of our country. There's not a quick fix to this.
Not necessarily.
Solution.
I think some of the paper mile proposals would have a system where it's able to take in different metrics, including access to public transport. And so in communities where there isn't access to public transport, they would not be paying.
A lot of my communities had before the SNP cut them, but they're not here to defend their decisions.
What would your solution be? You don't want fuel duty to go up. You don't want to pay per mile road tax. What would you suggest, Andrew?
Well, I mean, we had a whole fully costed manifesto going into the last election, and David, last bit we did. I mean, we increase productivity, which would bring in tens.
I've never seen David laugh so much.
Reduce the size of the civil service to pre-COVID levels. All of these things we'd be able to do, which would increase revenue for the Treasury, and we wouldn't need to think about changing or increasing
cliff edge like
fuel
the
tax
bus subsidy?
Well, we certainly wouldn't have increased.
The cliff edge. Everything has been a cliff edge. You've funded things till the end of March, full stop.
Well, look, we certainly wouldn't have increased the bus fares that we've seen the government doing. We wouldn't be looking at increasing fuel duty. We probably wouldn't be looking at increasing alcohol duty either, which is another thing that the alcohol in the Scotch whisky industry, again, very important in my part of the world, are very concerned about as well. And we certainly wouldn't be talking down the British economy to the extent that the Labour Party are, which is having hugely damaging consequences.
Would still be in an economy in crisis if we were under the Conservative government.
I don't think we would be at all. We are not. The crisis is manufactured. The crisis is manufactured. We inherited a crisis in 2010. I'm sorry, David. We did inherit a crisis in 2010.
I thought you were in favour of the Office for Budget Responsibility.
We were. We created the Office for Budget Responsibility as a result of the decisions that Gordon Brown took when he was.
Hang on. Don't talk over each other. On that point that David has just raised, Jeremy Hunt, the Shadow Chancellor, seems to now want to bury, it seems, the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Well, no. I think there are serious questions to ask about the impartiality of the Office for Budget Responsibility and the politicisation of that organisation and the way that they are being pushed to publish this report, a highly politicised report, on the day of the budget. I think they really do need to examine whether or not...
But you used to believe in the indemandence of the OBR. Is that because of a change of government?
We do believe in the independence of the OBR, which is why we're so worried about the position that they seem to be forced into tomorrow.
David?
I just rest my case. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Well, but what about the point that it's been politicised ahead of this budget?
By publishing it on the day of the budget. When else would you publish it?
I mean, the other thing is that Rachel Reeves has been at pains to get oversight from the Office for Budget Responsibility, which was something that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng failed to do with the mini-budget in September 2022. So, again, why have you lost faith in the OBR suddenly?
We haven't lost faith in the OBR, but we are concerned about the politicisation and the fact that they seem to have been pushed into publishing this report alongside the budget tomorrow, a budget that's going to be hugely damaging to the economy. We haven't seen the report from the OBR, obviously, just yet. We'll need to wait for it to be published.
Well, just before I come to you, Kirsty, Nikki Meader, just before you go, is there any message or anything you would like to see Rachel Reeves announce in tomorrow's budget?
I just wouldn't want to see increases in too many different areas, because a small business like myself has to absorb every single area. So if you increase tax, wages, employers' national insurance, for one business like me, that's 5 or 6 increases.
All right, Nikki Meader, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be watching the budget, and maybe we'll talk to you again in the not-too-distant future. Kirsty, did you want to say something in response to the Office for Budget Responsibility?
Yeah, I think I agree with Andrew. I think we've slightly crossed a Rubicon between an Office for Budget Responsibility whose job is to mark the budget and one that has been drafted in to make a political point. The Office of Budget Responsibility could do that report, but not in the context of within the budget. They should have said no to that to maintain their appearance of independence.
We're going to be covering the budget live and uninterrupted, so don't forget to tune in for our special budget programme, because we're on air from 11:15 right through to 3 p.m, a marathon on BBC Two, BBC News, iPlayer and BBC Sounds. And if you're wondering what the budget will mean for your finances, do get in touch with us at Your Voice, Your BBC News. You can send your questions on WhatsApp, on email and online. Just go to bbc.co.uk/your Your Voice budget. And we'll have correspondents here on Politics Live to answer all of your questions. It's going to be extremely busy tomorrow. Just before we move on, David Blunkett, you wrote a letter in The Guardian, I think today, about the budget. Do you think that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have got the tone, or have had the tone, a correct tone in terms of gloomy, which is what they've had to set out, they feel, in the last few months, and now trying to say what all this gloom and sacrifice will be for?
Yeah, I think they've moved towards a better balance between the issue of growth on the one hand, stability on the other, of the economic orthodoxy and reassuring people, and having a progressive political agenda. My letter was also about the fact that today is the centenary of the defeat of the first ever very short-lived minority Labour government back in 1924. I thought I'd better mark it.
Oh, well.
And not least because it was affected by a piece of spin, which was called the Zinoviev letter. He was head of the Comintern, which was the Communist International, and hadn't written the letter. It was a forgery, but it made a big difference in the election. I just thought it was worth throwing in that fake news, as we come up to next week's presidential election in the States, was alive and well a century ago.
There's nothing new in the world, is there?
No, some things just never change, do they? They just get updated. Well, here is a little bit of news. The adult prison population in England and Wales has dropped by 3% to 85,800 after reaching a record high of just over 88,000 at the end of August. Now, this drop in the prison population comes after the government, in part, freed more prisoners early to ease overcrowding last week. They also announced at the same time this BBC News headline: ex-Conservative Gawke, that's David Gawke, former Justice Secretary, to lead review of prison sentences. Do you welcome that, Kirsty?
Absolutely. It's always good to uncork the Gawke. Look, I think there's two or three things here. I think one of the things that people, I think incorrectly, have come to the conclusion about prisons is that one of the reasons that they're so overcrowded is we've got in a kind of politics arms race of wanting to be seen as tough on crime and the causes of crime. The biggest surge in the prison population happened between the 90s and sort of 2010, when we quite rightly as a society started to treat violence against women and girls and sexual abuse more seriously. Until the 80s, it was possible to get a fine for raping a woman because she was deemed to be sort of contributory negligent to what had happened.
Kirsty, you'll know that the figures, statistically, in terms of trying to get rape convictions or even rape cases to court is negligible.
Infinitesimal. The rape conviction rate in this country is still 2%, which is appallingly low.
Right.
Nevertheless, there's been a 140% increase in those sort of 30 years of convictions arising, coming to court and going into sentencing.
But you will accept, because you worked for Liz Truss when she was Justice Secretary, you will accept that the prison population has just grown exponentially and the prison places haven't kept up.
It has remained relatively static since 2010 at around 85,000. The big surge has been society sending more violent people to prison for longer.
David Blunkett, you were, of course, Home Secretary a while ago. Have you changed your view about prison and whether it works and how it should work better?
No, I haven't. I believe that people who committed heinous crimes should be sent to prison for a very long time, not just in terms of punishment, but the message it sends and the kind of society we want. But I also believed in community sentencing, and we haven't got that balance right. And if we could, with community orders that worked, that referred people for alcohol or drug misuse properly, and we actually intervened earlier, then we could do a good job. The youth justice system actually works very well, and there's been a massive drop in very young people getting involved with the criminal justice system. But between sort of 18 and 40, the problem has risen. And I think that David Gawke's got a challenging but very important job to do in terms of that balance of sentencing. But it will require resource into the probation service, which was completely disabled almost a decade ago when it was privatised. All parties now agree that that was a major mistake.
Andrew?
No, we do. We acknowledge that. And I think it is good that David Gawke's been asked to lead this review. Huge respect cross-party for David and his time as Lord Chancellor, and indeed the other roles that he held in government, and it's not unusual for a member of an opposition party to be asked when they've got experience in government of an issue to conduct a review like this. Everybody agrees the situation in our prisons is far from satisfactory. You can point the recent spike in prison sentences as a result of the backlog created by COVID, but we acknowledge it's not where we want it to be. The question that we are asking is, are the people who are being released early the people that should be out walking the streets again? And do we have confidence in this Labour government when they have a prison minister who wants to reduce the prison numbers by a third, that this government will take the right decisions in terms of who it is going to release early to free up those spaces? Those are the questions that we are asking, whilst acknowledging the situation is not perfect at all.
Fatima?
I mean, where to start? Actually, a good place to start is in the UK. We have a higher number of people in prison relatively than any other Western country except the United States of America. We have a problem. Sentencing is one place that we could look at, but actually we need a broader review of our justice systems. What is, causing criminality in societies and communities where you have high inequality, you have higher rates of criminality. There's something going wrong at the community level, how we're supporting people. James Timpson actually was a great prisons minister was a great appointment, someone who actually has experience working with ex-offenders, rehabilitating them, getting them into good work. Those are the types of people I actually want looking at this and reviewing our prison system. So I actually do trust when he says actually 2/3 of people should not be in prison. And a lot of these people have underlying mental health issues, have underlying, community-based issues that they could be supported with, either with community sentencing or other forms of rehabilitation.
10% of offenders commit 50% of all crimes in this country, and 80% of those are on drugs. So you're 100% right. We need much better early intervention, both in terms of mental health and drug treatment programs within the community. Short-term sentences, I don't think you'll find many people in this country now that think that short-term sentences do anything in terms of cutting reoffending or improving people's
Well, is that
life
true?
chances.
David,
Or
do you
public
agree? I mean,
protection.
David Gauke has suggested jail terms of less than 6 months should be scrapped.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but there has to be an alternative as well, and we can do it much better now with home domestic curfew and tagging, which was a bit of a joke at the time I introduced it back in 2004 when people put things on wooden legs and all kinds of jokes were about. We can do it a lot better than we have in the past, and frankly, we've got to, because we've got to try and get this right. Otherwise, we're in a vicious circle. Recidivism is the biggest challenge, as Kirsty, you just said, and answers to that and to stop that happening would massively change the conditions in our community, which Fatima's referred to.
I mean, there is a contradiction, though, isn't there, at the heart of some of the previous government's messaging, because the previous Justice Secretary, Conservative Alex Chalk, was unveiling reforms to increase community sentences and reduce the shorter sentences we've been discussing.
He is a good guy.
Yeah, he's still around.
No
Whilst the Prime Minister launched a crackdown on shoplifting, where perpetrators could be sent to prison for up to 6 months, or more recently, people who were involved in the riots over the summer, where people feel they should go. These people should be jailed. How do you deal with that contradiction?
It's a hugely complex issue and area, which is why, as David said, rightly, David Gauke has got a big challenge on his hands conducting this review. I don't want to prejudge his work. I don't want to comment on suggestions that he may have made whilst going through his work. You mentioned shoplifting. There has been a spike in shoplifting in the country, so we needed to act to put in place a deterrent to those people who were committing that crime. But as I said, and as David has acknowledged, the work that Alex Chalk was doing as Lord Chancellor certainly gave a direction of travel for a government in terms of where we wanted to get to. And our problem is not with what the government are doing. It is, however, in the way that they're doing it, and our concern that some of the people who
they said they were left with no alternative
are the wrong people, and indeed that they may be looking to reduce prison numbers by such a number that some people who the British people would expect to be behind bars will not be. That is our concern. We do acknowledge the situation in our prisons, however.
Let me just show you this headline in The Guardian. And David Blunkett, this was something that was introduced by you. The headline says, 5 still in jail 16 years after being given IPP sentences, which stands for imprisonment for public protection of below 6 months. So says the data. Do you regret bringing in those sentences?
Yeah, I've spoken and written and done everything over the last, 14 years, really, since it became clear that that wasn't working and had been inappropriately applied.
What were they? Explain to us what you thought they were going to do.
They were sentences that followed an existing sentence, 2 strikes and you're in, which was put in 1997, just before we were elected, and where people couldn't get out. They were in forever, even if they hadn't committed a murder or a rape. And we thought we were doing the right thing in terms of saying people who are quite seriously recidivists and or very dangerous, that they would be in until the parole board believed that they were safe, and that we would put in therapies and courses which then never materialised, and people were sentenced to this particular imposition when an alternative would have worked.
Right.
And of course, the longer people are in, this is a really important point, the more their mental health deteriorates, the less likely it is that the parole board will release them.
Well, let me just draw everyone's attention to a particular case. I think you have been in touch, David Blunkett, with Rod Russell's brother. Rod Russell is still currently serving an IPP sentence. His brother is calling for his sentence to be reformed, and this is part of an interview from BBC Points West. Let's have a look.
I'm not defending what he did, and what he did must have been terrifying for the victim. At the end of the day, there is a victim out of all of this. What I'm campaigning for is the disproportionate length of the sentence. He has seen murderers, rapists, paedophiles, other criminals that have committed heinous crimes come into prison after him and then get released.
David?
Yes, I've spoken to him and understand entirely where he's coming from, and what we probably need now for some of the prisoners, and this applies more broadly as well on the mental health point earlier, we need secure mental health provision that actually does make a difference to their lives and their future, and we don't have that. We have Broadmoor and Rampton when people are dangerous from the very beginning, and then they're sent there rather than prison. What we need is an intermediary position where we can have therapeutic but secure environment.
Let's move on. This headline in The Times: sickness benefit toll dramatically underestimated for years. Overly optimistic forecasts could cost the taxpayer £2 billion, the Chancellor is warned. The Centre for Social Justice, a think tank co-founded by Conservative Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, focused on tackling poverty, has claimed there could be this black hole, yet another one. Andrew, why is our sickness benefit bill so high?
Look, I think, as in many things, we have to look to the pandemic for the situation that we find ourselves in right now.
But the UK, as you know from the figures, has been the slowest to sort of bounce back in terms of getting people off long-term sickness and back into work compared to comparable EU countries.
Yeah, we have, and as Mel Stride has set out many times as the now shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, having been Work and Pensions Secretary, we had plans to reform PIP, to reform the welfare system so that we could get these people back into the workplace. There was a real problem with getting people of working age back to work, especially those people who dropped out as a result of the pandemic. We wait and see what the new government would seek to do with that. We do not think the reforms actually go far enough to sort this issue. We acknowledge that there is a problem, and we had a plan to fix it, and now it's up to the new government to take that on and actually ensure that we get these people back in the workplace and we reduce the benefits bill, which is far too big.
Right, well, the Work and Pensions Secretary, Fatima Liz-Kendall, is not going to reverse the Conservative plans that would see potentially hundreds of thousands of people with mobility and mental health problems have their benefits cut from the spring as they press ahead with trying to get more people back into work. Do you welcome that?
I mean, I think that's devastating. That we have a Labour government who is wanting to carry on the same Tory policies. I think just to bring us back to what you started with, I don't agree with what you said, but you started with the pandemic. We did have a global pandemic. There are 2 million people who have long COVID. The reason actually we have more people sick is because of the state of our NHS. The reason we haven't bounced back is because of the state of our NHS. We have 7.1 million people on NHS waiting lists. People don't have access to the necessary medical help to get better. So of course we have people who are unwell and who need these state benefits in order to maintain an income. So I'm kind of done with governments who want to go down lines of conspiracy and tackle symptoms, but not really go after the systems that are creating these symptoms.
David?
Well, of course you've got to do both. The biggest challenge for the incoming government is the exponential rise in the benefits. It's not just where we are now, it's where we're going to be with 2.8 million people of working age.
And is that inevitable?
Not working. No, I don't think it is. 51 billion is going on people who have some form of disability or long-term sickness. Turning that round isn't going to be easy, and it will take time. But I think you've got to say something for something. So, of course, we will support and sustain you, but as a return, you've got to agree to take action yourself as well. I'm sorry, we did say this back in 1997-98, and we got a bit of a drubbing for it then, and I suspect that Liz Kendall and Rachel Reeves will get a bit of a drubbing for it now.
Is it the right approach, Kirsty?
Well, I mean, David's right. It's a profound problem, and it's going to get worse in the lifetime of this Parliament. On top of the 800,000 we've seen come in since COVID onto the sickness benefits, there's going to be the same amount again by the end of this Parliament. What's interesting is a slightly different approach from this government. They're going to be putting out a white paper. I don't think it's coming out with a budget tomorrow. But one of the main issues on that is that they're going to devolve this issue down to mayors to be able to align getting people back into work with improving skills, because they know in their community what it is people need. It's a very different approach, and hopefully it will have a profound impact.
And some great work by my former colleague Alan Milburn, who looked at an area very close to me in South Yorkshire, in Barnsley, and what needed to be done, particularly with young people who were literally out of work, out of education,
and then going on to
out of training.
Yes,
yeah.
On to training,
Sorry,
but also the mental. No, it's
yeah.
also the mental health issues for a lot of young people who are going on to long-term sick. Many of them straight out of education. But Fatima, is this going to be enough? We're going to show you pictures of Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, with the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, because you talked about the access to health facilities, to hospital appointments. There is this cash injection of £1.57 billion announced in England, and here the pair are in a hospital. Yesterday they went along as they launched this to try and create 40,000 new appointments, or extra appointments, I should say, a week. Does that go some way?
I mean, it's a start. We know the state of our NHS needs a lot more investment, and sort of, I guess what I was saying earlier is we need to be seeing this as a public health issue and not just a DWP issue. And that what we want is young people, people across society wanting to be productive in society and take these jobs. Another element of this is like creating a good jobs and a sort of a skilled workforce. I'm a climate campaigner. We have a huge task getting to net zero. We have a skills gap in this country. We need young people who are taking up green jobs, who are able to transition our economy. So it would be nice to see a government who's wanting to invest in green jobs and skilling these young people up so that they can take the jobs of the future. And so this is a sort of a holistic solution is needed about creating healthy societies, good jobs, good housing, so we can have an economy that can grow.
I don't disagree with the thing that Fatima just said. We've got a skills gap in the hundreds of thousands right now from where we are to where we need to get to if we're going to deliver all of the projects that will deliver a cleaner future, investing in all the new technologies as well as keeping the lights on today. So we've got a huge task on our hands, and that will be part of the solution moving forward. And of course we need to see reform within the NHS and investment in specific areas.
But the Conservatives claim that they could save £12 billion on health-related benefits. How would you do that?
Well, as I said, David Gauke set all these plans out, reforming personal independence payment.
Achievable?
Yeah, of course they were achievable. In the same way that all of our, it was a fully costed manifesto, Joe. We were determined.
I thought we were about to reach consensus.
Well, I hate to spot it. Do you think £12 billion, David Blunkett, is achievable?
Not overnight. No, it will take time, and it has to be a plus. It has to be an offer, not a threat.
We did say it would take time. We never said for 1 minute it was going to happen overnight.
No, but it is about the approach. What, you think the Tories were too threatening in their approach?
Well, it sounded like a punishment, and all of this should be, do you want to work? Do you want to be active? Do you want to be healthy? Do you want to make a contribution to the world around you? I found very few people, when you put it like that, who'd say, no, I don't, I'd rather just atrophy.
Well, would this help? This BBC News headline, mental health patients could get job coach visits. Would you be in favour of that, Kirsty?
Yeah, look, anything, I mean, Fatima's right. A lot of this is about people's mental health. It's about managing long-term conditions where sometimes you're capable of working and sometimes you aren't. I've experienced this myself. I went through cancer last year. There were whole weeks where I was perfectly capable of working and days when I couldn't get out of bed. So it's a very complicated and nuanced situation. If I can just run the risk of aggravating you a bit, Fatima, one of the biggest problems in terms of impacting on the NHS isn't just the huge backlog we've got. We've got an increasingly ageing population.
Yes.
So as fast as you put money into the NHS, ageing populations have complex health needs and it just keeps on going.
In case you've forgotten, the budget's on tomorrow and I'll be here from 11:15 with coverage until 3:15. But thank you to all of my guests for joining me today, the day before it all, and discussing all of the issues that will no doubt come up tomorrow. From all of us here, bye-bye.